Start with the printer.
The argument was for or against?
No, my shit will go on my head. You want?
The argument.
Which St. Anselm's?
If you want to get a nice
I got 3 donuts and some four.
All right,
But
you're on.
Hey guys, go. We want to hear a story. Let's go.
complimenting him.
Yo, say the whole story like.
Start with the printer again.
So, very brief. I grew up in this from Chabad family. I started developing an interest in theology when I was 13. My dad was bringing home these posh emails at the time, and so I asked him to bring home more theological stuff, philosophical stuff. And when I encountered this thing, St. Anselm's ontological argument, which is this medieval Christian argument for the existence of God. And I didn't know what it was. And so I asked my dad if it would be okay for me to go past the library and look it up. So, you know, with a name like St. Anselm, probably not about the Sarah. But my father said, go ask the Rav. So I asked the Rav. The Rav said, sure. So I went to the library and I just went through the philosophy section, just started reading. And I didn't find out what St. Anselm's ontological argument was that time, but I did end up reading a couple of books of philosophy and finding that, like, for me at that time, the arguments against the existence of God were very convincing. And I don't know if it happened within a matter of weeks or if it happened the same day, but very soon I decided that I was an atheist, that I didn't believe in God, and that I wasn't going to participate in any Jewish ritual anymore. So I come home and I tell my parents that, I'm done, and they, I guess, refused to accept my resignation. So for a while after that, I'd get into fights with them about putting my tefillin on or not. That really culminated for me when I was at my grandparents once, and I got into an argument with my late grandfather about putting tefillin on, and we were fighting about it, and then I threw my tefillin on the floor and stormed out of the house and just walked up to the cliffs and just walked along the length of the fences of the cliffs, just destroyed. And I think that night I left my grandparents and went back to my parents' house, and that was it. They didn't force me to put on tefillin anymore. For a few years, I was, I guess, meeting and talking with a lot of Jews about my questions in a broad sense. A lot of the time people would say, oh, I don't know the answer, but you should go talk to so-and-so, and I talked to so-and-so and I wouldn't get any answers. And it was a sort of even mix between like trying to figure out if there were answers to this question and just trying to show people who didn't have good reasons for believing what they believed in that they were wrong. After a few years of this, I sort of chilled out a bit on that. I started and decided like I'm just gonna let people do their thing.
How old are you at this point?
When I started chilling out,
Yeah.
I think like about 20. So for like 6-7 years, I was.
Okay. Because you were anti-religion, anti-Judaism.
Yeah, I was like
Good 7 years.
vocally anti-religion for a good 6 or 7 years.
Are you living at home the whole time?
From when to when?
No, I from 14 to 20.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
No, but at
maybe
14.
20 to 21. Sorry?
Started at 14.
Yeah, started 14.
That's
I was
crazy.
I was very like open about it. I think a lot of people like go through something similar to what I went through, but they don't like make a big deal about it. They try to hide it. I was like very vocally the town atheist from a young age, and I remember like at like Yeshiva Boys High School where I was studying, during lunchtime, standing on the steps of the yeshiva with like everyone else there. So it was a school of like 40 people, and I was standing on the steps with like everyone else in the school around me, and I was arguing that there was no God, and everyone else was arguing that there was.
Yeshiva?
This was yeshiva.
What, how old were you?
This would have been the first year, I guess, that I was an atheist. Like
How about every
14.
time you say time and place that something happens?
You want me to give ages?
So about the age of, 'cause
Okay.
then I'm going to interrupt you.
Fair enough.
Get like a timeline.
I'll try and give timelines. So this was about 14. about 14 that I was
And the printer?
having
What about the
sex.
printer?
The printers were about 13.
Right.
All right. So I guess one of the things that happened in that time from 14 to 20 is like about 17 I started learning kung fu. And yeah, I know.
Why?
Because there was a guy down like on the same block as me who was like an old kung fu master. So it's like, yeah, that's what you do in those situations.
That's cool.
Also, I got into a bad spot one time. I got beat up, like rolled by like 4 or 5 guys.
Where?
This was I would have been like 16, I think. And
What kind of people? Like Jewish people?
no, just young hooligans, I guess.
You got like
Hoodlums.
Mugged, yeah.
They took your wallet or something?
They took. I didn't. It was Yitzi Shabbos. I don't think I had a wallet on me, but I had a phone
They
and a
took
watch.
your printer.
Just left it alone. Never. I worked hard for this
Now I
printer.
have to get it from my dad's work every Friday.
It was not
Who
me.
missed it? They mugged him, and I said they took his printer.
The printer was at the office, buddy.
Yeah, I know, but it's funny because you
No,
can't.
this is the
It's at the
I have to-
office!
How old are you, man?
prequel.
Wait, bro, is that, where was that?
This was in Sydney, Australia.
Monstrous buffoons. Ugly.
Yeah, did you say Sydney, Ohio?
I don't know, I thought that was
I'm Australian, man.
When did you realize that the time is that you have to like embrace your feelings, hug your feelings?
No, wait for the story.
Oh,
Whoa, spoilers, man, spoilers, mad spoilers. So I was so at this point like 17. I started kung fu, and it was I don't know if you guys know much about like Chinese martial arts.
Oh, I watched Karate Kid.
Okay,
Oh yeah.
the new one or the old one?
Wax on,
The
wax off.
old one.
So the old one was
Wax
like
garbage.
a Japanese martial
Wax
arts.
on,
The new
wax
one,
off.
yeah.
Yeah, my dad's set like his teacher, his karate teacher. He went to Toro Dojo, and so his
I'm sorry, Torah Dojo.
Toro Dojo. Yeah, it was a
So
big-
happy
and
that
he,
it
he
is.
got
Oh,
like
great.
he had a first degree black belt or something eventually.
Possibly.
You know, after he retired. But like basically his his teacher was like
All the way
in Asia, and
All the way.
he had he was given seafood,
Give it to.
and his teacher
Can I get another one of those?
basically was the story that that was like the inspiration for Karate Kid apparently, because this guy had a roommate, and the roommate apparently like heard his story about how he was a kid and that he had like this karate teacher that just taught him this stuff, and he thought, oh, that would make a cool movie, I guess. I mean, whenever he became a producer,
The new one or the old one?
the old one. The old one.
So you're saying that like Torah Dojo is like in the Karate Kid lineage?
Yeah, I guess you could say
It's
it.
gay.
All right.
Keep going, you
Guys,
got
let's
it.
try to keep the question to the end so we can get into the story.
Past 30 minutes,
Where's the
like
chat
you haven't
box?
said
Yeah, I
anything.
see.
Yeah, like,
Okay,
you know
so
what?
try.
You said all that in 10
There weren't
seconds.
printers.
You said all that in 10 seconds.
Alright, Shlomo, let him go. Let him go.
Okay,
Sorry, continue.
no problem, Yossi. So we've got this. At this point, I'm like at like 17. I started training kung fu, and it was most of the styles in China come from from Buddhist monasteries, but the styles that I was doing came from Taoist monasteries, and Taoism's like this small Eastern religion that like sort of isn't so threatening to atheists because it doesn't really have an explicit position on God or gods, and so I was reading that as a kid. I was reading like these. I started reading like these Taoist books at 17, and I found that just learning the philosophies and like the religious texts from Taoism helped me with my fighting a bit. So I was like, oh yeah, well I guess religions are wrong, but this one at least is a little bit useful. A couple years later, a friend of mine recommended that I go try out this thing called Vipassana meditation. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. There's like this, they do these meditation retreats all over the world now, where you go out to the countryside, some resort somewhere, and you take a vow of silence on the first day, and for like 10 days you can't talk, you can't like gesture to people, you can't make eye contact with people, you can't read. You heard about this? Yeah. So that's what this guy
try to
told
make
me.
people talk.
You probably
Make people
shouldn't.
laugh.
You probably shouldn't.
Do you text?
No,
Oh, you didn't
no
have that.
electronics. I might have done that at some point.
So what do you
Okay,
do
let's
with
continue,
the
sorry.
days? What are you doing to teach them?
They teach you how to meditate. You show up in the morning, you sit down.
How do you talk to them? I thought you can't talk.
You don't talk, they talk.
What about Twitter?
So you can't make eye contact with the person.
Facebook?
You wanted Twitter?
You're sitting with your eyes closed. That's all you're doing, and they're talking, and
It
you're
just
there.
says close your eyes now and listen to me or something.
The whole point of it is to basically, you're not talking, you're just thinking so much.
You're not. Well, I mean, they teach you the style of meditation. Introspection. So you
I'm
learn.
laughing at him, not you.
No,
They laugh at doofy stuff. I'm sorry, continue going.
Guys, this video is going live, so it's letting me know.
Is it live now?
Yo, you're like.
Hi, Mom! Hi, Dad, if you're still around.
Yossi's mom and dad. He says hi.
They're separate people.
Says hi each. So I did this. I went to the mountains and I did this Buddhist meditation retreat, and it was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most beneficial. It's really, really hard to sort of know what other ways of being in your own mind exist, because for me at least, like I'd had like this brain that was just going all the time, nonstop, my whole life, and like maybe it would stop for or like slow down for brief moments when I'd get in flow, but the idea that I could like just manually calm myself down was just brand new to me. And it opened up just new ways of being present in myself, being aware of myself and of others, being able to sit in silence, even if only for a few seconds, and just, I guess, like the beginnings of what you might call a spiritual dimension to life. That again was something that I couldn't have explained to myself beforehand, but once I started meditating, that started to develop. So that was 19 when I went to this camp. I went to a couple more over the next few years, so for a couple more of the 10-day camps, and I really felt like at that moment that I was like, oh well, religions are all wrong, but Taoism was useful and Buddhism is very useful, so that's interesting. Over the next few years, I developed an interest in religions in general. I started, yeah, Aaron.
That if you ask us, say, what's the religion of peace? I would say Judaism, but Buddhism is
Questions at the end.
About that question.
Questions at the end, Ari.
Hold that question because it.
Questions at the end, Ari.
Stop enforcing your religion upon.
Keep going.
You decided that that's the rule.
Questions at the end, Ari.
No, you're not the rabbi though, so you don't make the rules.
I already made that.
Yeah, man, you're at the
He's just
rabbi.
looking for Yeah, the rabbi has a smaller
The
beard.
rabbi can't do this. I can because that one's gonna diss me. I got a skewer in my hand.
We're never gonna finish this.
We'll get there. Okay, so I got into Taoism, got into Buddhism. Next thing that happened was someone gave me a book on Hinduism, which was recommended a book on Hinduism, which it was even more far out there because Hinduism says a lot of things, and I was like, come on, man. But again, I was like, well, you're wrong about what you're saying about the world, but I can see how your systems are useful. I can see how your models of the world are useful. And so I got a lot of benefit from that. And that was that was just basically the way I was going was I was just reading more books on different religions and practicing different stuff. I went and chanted with the Krishnas at their temple.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I was into it. I was a sort of tourist of religions, but I took it very serious.
Ashrams.
Yeah.
So what's it like? Like, does it actually feel like fulfilling? Like, what's it like?
Yeah, I think this is what I was developing at the time was a sort of model of religions where I could see how the people who were born into Hindu families and raised Hindu and attempted to be good Hindus, like Hinduism could be like a really good vehicle for training themselves to be good and fulfilled people. The same was true of Buddhism, the same was true of Taoism. The one religion I wasn't sure about at the time, like I was really not sure about, was Islam.
Yeah.
You sure you don't want to blow yourself up?
Yeah.
Well, that was the
They talk
attitude.
I heard it's blessed.
I heard the glasses.
It's a blast.
It's
Oh,
very
it's so
interesting.
good.
No, but just wondering, like, what are the actual benefits, like, of the?
You got a 401k.
Of religions in
You're
general.
saying like it's very beneficial because you feel very like benefited and you feel like you're very spiritual. But like, what actual benefits in real life do you have, like in actual benefits?
It's a constant, like, I mean, that's a huge question,
Constant what?
but I'll give you the one sentence answer. It transforms the way you live life into
It's not specific.
I'm finishing the sentence. It transforms the way you live life from like a set of disparate and irrelevant events to a constant mindful practice, to a constant attention to how am I living my life, in what way does it line up with the values and systems that I'm
Does that allow
embedded
you
in.
to like appreciate every moment in a better way? Like,
Appreciate every moment in a better way, appreciate your position in every moment, and also
You're
like be
converted.
better to people.
You don't know it.
I think that's a big part of it.
Let's all just get out of
Yeah.
here and head straight to the closest.
Yeah.
What religion is that? What religion is that?
I think that's all religions.
Opium.
Yeah.
I definitely think Judaism
I love opium.
So that's where I was up to at the time. I was in my 20s, maybe 26, I think. When I was walking through like the trendy area of Sydney, and I was passing a cafe, I think in Chippendale, and or a restaurant, and I was passing by, and I heard these two people sitting out the front speaking Arabic. I don't know how much you know about Arabic, but Arabic has a sort of rural dialect which is very coarse, and an urban dialect which is very refined. I'm simplifying greatly, but it sounds very pleasant. And the Arabic they were speaking sounded really good. And I just walked up to them and I said, "Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but I
Want to test out your religion?
Listen,
Tried the rest.
I wasn't that forward. I said I still want to interrupt, but I heard your Arabic and it sounds very beautiful, and just wanted to say that. All right, thanks." And I turned to go, and one of them says to me, "Stay, talk with us." And I say, "All right, but I warn you, I only speak English." And he says, "English is fine." And so I sit down, and then his friend stands up. And as his friend stands up, I see that he's wearing an apron, and that he's actually the guy working there at the time. This is his place. And so he goes back to work, and now I'm just sitting across from this.
Ooh, that's awkward.
Yeah, right? I thought I'd just sit there and listen to them talk. But now I'm in this conversation with this guy.
I'd like to have a one-on-one with you right now.
Yeah, pretty much.
Where you been, buddy?
So we started having our one-on-one, and this guy tells me his name is Omar, and he's a Palestinian Muslim. His father, I think, was born in Gaza.
talk about awkward.
Yeah.
They have
So,
hospitals there?
Well, so I said to him, "Look, I'm a Jew. You're a Palestinian Muslim. My people hate your people hate my people. Let's talk." That was it. And I said that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he
got
said
that
the
out of the
fire.
way. And he said, pretty much, he just smiled and he said, "Very well." And so we talked.
Infidelity.
And we spoke honestly
Peace
about.
offer was peace offer was what's it called last week. This week, only war.
So I sat down and I spoke with him, and over the next few months we like met up many times, and we would talk, and I was I guess my way of being at the time with religious people, and I guess that's still true to some point, is I'm just fascinated in learning about their religion. And so I just asked him heaps of questions about Islam, and he'd tell me stories. And one of the big things, I don't know how much you know about Islam, but at the center of Islam is the Quran, which according to Islamic doctrine is the word of God. And then around that there are the hadith, and for the Sunnis, the Sunnah, which are both sort of stories of the kind of like Medrash, but they're basically all centered around the life and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. So
It's a metaphor.
there.
But you just have to tie your tails together, let them on fire.
Wow. Yeah.
That's okay. Can we continue, please?
Yeah. Tough act to follow. Continue.
So I.
I know what you were looking at.
So, fair. So I would I'd meet with my friend Omar, and he'd tell me these stories.
Your motivation was curiosity, or you had a genuine, you were looking for truth?
You just came in.
Questions at the end. Questions at the end.
Write it down.
Choose to ignore that or to.
Fair. I mean, I think it was a story. I was.
Keep going. We'll never get to the end.
Fair. So I was. Cheers. So something I'd noticed leading up to this from tales of the Buddha and tales of the holy men of various faiths was that there seemed to be a character type to these people that was very clear and very distinct and really strangely consistent. So it's sort of if you examine the character of holy men across the world in different religions, in different times, they seem to act in the same way. They seem to move with just immense attention to people, immense compassion, a care for the people around them, a constant attention to their own deeds and to their own motivations, and a zeal for doing good all the time.
Buddhist, right?
Everyone.
All of the character types.
Islam as well.
So that was my question. Because from like I grew up Jewish. I grew up like hearing stories about the Gulf War and the suicide bombings and everything like that. And the Muslims were the vague boogeyman of the outside world. And what I was started to pick up, which surprised me, was that the stories of the Prophet Muhammad in Islam demonstrated the same sorts of characteristics that I'd come to see in the saints of all the other world faiths.
I heard he was like raping little kids.
Okay. This is live. This is live. Thank you. Enough said. No questions or answers.
Hey, let everyone know, like that's
Yeah, you gotta let them
You know
know.
why?
He's addressing that stereotype.
You know why at the time of Muhammad there wasn't any stories about going out and killing Jews?
No idea. Don't know.
Want to know why?
No.
Because we know at that time if
Just
he
wanted
ever
to
do
know.
something, the Jews would annihilate him and everybody that's surrounding him.
Ari, did you ever sit with Omar for like 5 hours? You never sat with
I know
Omar.
someone who did. Let's hear
You
his
never
story.
sat with Omar, right?
Yeah, man.
Joseph Campbell? Joseph Campbell's book?
Never sat with Omar.
Love it.
Guys,
Change-
let's hear
change
what
my
Omar.
life.
Omar.
Yeah.
There you go. Single camera.
Omar.
Alright, guys.
Ralph, Omar.
Do you want to?
Keep going.
All right.
Okay, Omar.
What am I say? So he would tell me these stories about just the early days of Islam, about the Prophet Muhammad, and also about the companions. So like Ali and Omar and Uthman, and yeah, and like the characteristics of these people was very familiar to me, and I was.
They were graceful ones.
Hmm?
You're talking about graceful characters.
Shut up, fool! Graceful ones. Characteristics that people like who've read Rabbi Nachman about like the attributes of the tzaddik will be familiar with this. So it was surprising to me, but I was enthralled by the way he was telling these stories, and they shed a lot of light for me. So I was talking to Omar, and I was like really compelled by these stories, and he said to me, "You should read the Quran." And I said, "Thanks, but no thanks." I said, "No, you should read the Quran." I was like, "Not so interested." And he'd say this every once in a while, and I'd decline. And then I started thinking about why it was that I was saying no. And I guess like on the basic level, I was just like, all right, well, I'm afraid of it, and I thought, well, why is that? And I thought, well, I'm afraid that I'll read a bit of it, and then maybe he'll go, convert or die. And I was like, I don't want to convert. And then I'll be beheaded. And I was like, wait a second. I don't see that in newspapers anywhere near
It'll be
as...
the headline.
Yeah, exactly. The B headline. All right. I don't see that in newspapers anywhere near as much as I'd expect to if that were really a concern. So then the other thing is, I guess, like, I'm kind of uncomfortable reading this guy's like most deeply held thing afterwards. Most deeply held thing, and you know, having an honest opinion about it. And then I thought, well, you know, I've come this far in some sense. I've always been open to trying to what is it the Talmud says? Receive wisdom from whoever offers it to you.
Yeah.
And unlike the Talmud's context, I was doing this without like the four amas of halacha around me. So I was really going for it.
You call
Adam. And so eventually I said, all right, I'll
Can you explain that?
No.
How much thing? What is that about?
very, very basically, the Talmud says receive wisdom from any man who gives it to you. But implicit in that statement is that people in the Talmud are already living within the laws of Judaism. So there are obvious caveats to that principle, but the principle is still staying.
What are the caveats? It's not.
By the way,
I would say like
Eretz come on Torah. So if you go out to the land and there is wisdom around you, because it's there Eretz come on Torah, you have to learn the wisdom of the land.
Right.
So even the time of Gemara, they went out to the land, they learned their wisdom, and then they came back and continued to learn the Torah.
Yeah, man. Yeah, they're all farmers.
So I think the obvious caveats would be like idol worshipping stuff. They were
It's not wisdom.
there can be wisdom embedded in it. There can be wisdom embedded in it, and that wisdom is there's stuff in Gemara Sota about like Greek wisdom, and then there's a whole discussion about what qualifies as that. But yeah, there are things.
Basically, like you should stay away from it if it's clearly like bad, like if it's good, has like
Right.
bad intentions, or if it's not real, like it's not really gonna help anybody.
Or even if it is, but it's embedded in something that's forbidden to you. Right.
Something bad around it that you just don't want to.
Right. So I was at this point in my at this point I was like, all right, I'm gonna read the Quran, and the Quran's quite a big book, so I didn't finish it, but I did start, and there are a few things that really struck me as I started reading the Quran. The first thing is that you sort of unlike, so in the Torah L'Havdil, we have like, it's third person. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And God said this, and God did this, and then like other characters come in and do stuff. And God's just like, well not just, but, right. It's not I, you, it's these people, this stuff. So the Quran's different in that the phrasing of it is second person. The idea is like this is stuff that God is saying directly to Muhammad, maybe like via the angel Gabriel, and then he's supposed to pass that on.
Stuff like I am Hashem your God.
Sure, but all that is in quotation
Don't
marks.
be Hashem.
Right, but that stuff like Moshe Rabbeinu comes and he says, and the Lord spake, saying, and then he quotes it, right? So that's a section. There'll be sections like
Only
that.
in the quotes that you have the I.
Exactly. Whereas the Quran, the whole thing is in those quotation marks.
Testament or something?
Well, you could
Like in
say
the first person, you mean?
it's in the first person from the point of view of God.
Oh, from
Yeah. So it's very confrontational in that sense. Yeah. I guess at this point I should probably point out like how close I'd come to being able to conceive of and address that sort of thing, like have it. So I've always been like very anti-drug for myself, very conservative. When I was like 19, I went around and asked people if you could go back and not smoke your first cigarette, would you? Or if you could go back and not drink your first beer, would you? And most smokers said, oh, if I could go back, I wouldn't smoke my first cigarette. But most drinkers said, no, if I could go back, I'd start my first beer. Yeah! Knock back a call on.
No worries, mate.
Yeah.
The verdict's out.
Yeah.
Ask them the same question when they're 70.
Yeah, maybe.
When their liver is like all messed up.
Yeah.
Were you in the army?
I was not.
While you're
Oh. Someone showed me that way.
While you're studying the Quran and all these religions, where are you now? What are you holding yourself as now? Hindu,
So
now Buddhism, now?
we're getting there. During the process. During the process. That's a great question. So during the process, I suppose I thought of myself as an atheist, and having that basis of atheism, I thought that I'm interested in this stuff, and I feel like there's wisdom here, and I'm not sure. Yeah, so until I think about my mid-20s, and then what happened was, so I was like, I had my first drink when I was 19, which in Australian years is like having your first drink at 50. It's just terribly non-respectable, but I had my first drink. To this day, I've never smoked a cigarette.
I had a first drink at 8 days.
Yeah,
To this day,
true.
you never smoked a cigarette?
Never smoked a cigarette.
That's cool.
Yeah, for sure. So that was like people were suggesting weed to me for years. I was like, nah, not so much.
Yeah, you get spiritual, man.
Spiritual.
Just feel the ground.
Exactly.
Your dreads.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm just doofing.
So I got to like
How far into the Quran did you get, by the way?
a few chapters, maybe 8, 9 chapters. But they get shorter as you go further.
Those are big chunks.
He runs out of things to write.
What?
Yeah, we're talking about you, Quran.
Yeah. You get past all on far.
There's some weird stuff in there, bro.
Okay.
Some weird
So
stuff.
let's talk about this more during question time.
Yeah, I googled it once. Like, there's something about like if you like kill someone, Muhammad will forgive you if you cut your arm off or something.
Translations are very tricky.
Yeah, but you can grow it back because you're a lizard person.
All right.
Right, maybe you'll get.
All right.
Yeah, right, yeah.
You gotta move.
It's not a
Fair.
question.
Okay. So let's.
In 31 minutes.
Really?
About 7 minutes in.
Okay.
I made about 7 minutes of the story in 31 minutes in.
Fair.
I think 71's enough.
So we've done about 7 minutes today. All right. So just I'm gonna give you the 3-minute wrap up. And then I'm gonna open the floor to questions.
When'd you come back?
As always. So. When I was about 25, someone finally convinced me to smoke weed.
Yeah.
And I did, and having already a background in meditation before I smoked meant that I was sort of, I think a lot of people they smoke and they go whoa, but then I was going whoa, and also on the meta level, wow.
Like the observer.
Yeah, exactly. So observing that, and in the same year, a different friend gave me acid to try, and MDMA in the same night.
Oh, good. Did you
Yeah.
jump on a punching bag?
This was all this morning, guys. This was all this morning.
Yeah. All of that. What? I did acid MD for the first time the same night. Yeah. It's pretty crazy night. Pretty crazy.
Except it's DMT.
Yeah, well, I hate DMT. It's far crazier.
Do you like see 5 of me right now or only one?
DMC.
I see all 5 of you.